Good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Corda. I'm the Director of Business Development at the Tech Collective. We're happy to have you here this morning for this presentation. We have a super lineup for you. I'm very excited today, but a little bit about the Tech Collective very briefly for those of you who don't know. We're the IT Industry Association for the state of Rhode Island. We provide training as well as the ability to come together and connect with other like-minded individuals. This month until June 30th, we have open nominations for our Tech 10 awards. This is an opportunity that we take every year to honor those people in the technology space who are really going above and beyond, developing apps, finding a new way to innovate your company. So and there's also the next tech generation for those folks that are new to technology, but you really feel they're going to be the ones to watch. So I will post in our chat the link for that. If you know someone that you'd like to nominate, I ask you to please take a moment to do that. And now for what you came for, cybersecurity failures and legal liability. We have an incredible group. Jana at Vertical 6 has lined up some high caliber presenters for today. So we have Jules D'Alessandro from D'Alessandro Wright. He's a partner for that firm working in cybersecurity, helping his clients really prepare and then mitigate risks. We have our own Rick Norberg, who's the CEO of Vertical 6. They provide virtual IT for companies, including the Tech Collective. And not last but not least, we have Carl Benevento, who is a cybersecurity specialist with Cybersecurity. So they all have achieved much more than what I have just said, but I know that you came to hear them and not me. So I thank you all for coming, and I will turn it over to the experts that are here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good morning, and thank you all for being here. It's a very important, cybersecurity has become extremely important for the proper operation of businesses now. So cybersecurity failures and legal liability is what we'll be discussing, pointing out those areas where if there is a cyber attack and it's not handled properly, the type of legal liability that can arise from that. So first of all, what is a cyber attack? Well, as you can see there, any type of offensive maneuver that targets computer information systems, infrastructure, computer networks, or personal computer devices. We know them mostly as hacks or some type of hacks. I got a quick list of the most common types of attacks, and Carl will be going through a little more detail later, but ransomware is something we hear about all the time. Where basically your data is taken hostage, so to speak, and you have to pay a ransom to get it back. Spyware, we literally have people there on your computer watching you. Phishing, spear phishing, where they're essentially targeting your computer specifically. This becomes big when it comes to employee education, because phishing and spear phishing is a big area where foreigners and hackers are gaining access to computers through employees, basically opening up a bad email, something of that event. So the cyber attack can affect you and your business, and I have written their entity ending event. Let those words sink in, because there are many companies that have found out that they are absolutely unable to recover from a cyber attack, or if they can recover, they find out that they cannot continue. There have been a lot of entities, whose lifespan has ended because of a cyber attack, and it really comes out of the two things we want you to remember and get from today's presentation is you have to prepare for a cyber attack. It's going to happen. Any expert in this area will tell you, you will be the victim of a cyber attack. You have to prepare for it, and only through proper preparation will you be able to survive it. So the legal liability is generally imposed, and the following conditions exist. An entity failed to implement the safeguards required by statute or reasonable security measures. Entity failed to remedy or mitigate the damage once it occurred, and failure to timely notify affected individuals on the state's data breach notification statutes. And at this point, every state has a data breach law. So wherever you exist, there is a law that specifically covers your conduct when it comes to a data breach. And if you do anything internationally, the EU standard is the most strict in the world. If there's going to be a lawsuit, like negligence, it's got to be proven in any litigation. But liability can also exist, with respect to contractual indemnification based on the agreements you have with your customers where you have promised to protect their information. So the damages that can arise from the unwanted intrusion, first and foremost, the cost and liability of the data breach to the company is going to include individual and class action lawsuits. And when we start talking about class action lawsuits, that is when a massive quantity of customers' information has been wrongfully accessed or breached and taken. And we are now seeing the rise of these class action lawyers coming out, and they're suing on behalf of, 10,000, 100,000, 500,000 users. Now, the users themselves, they might get $5 to $10, and maybe you have to open up a credit monitoring account for them. But when you start doing the math, if you have 500,000 people, $5 to $10, you can see quickly how crippling a class action lawsuit can be. And we see these mostly when you fail to follow whatever the data protection laws are that apply to where you exist. Further problems or penalties that can result are, government investigations coming in to take a look around your place and what you have and haven't done. Sometimes you deal with bigger companies contractually, and then they decide that they're going to start sending in their own response team or their own audit team. And again, these are essentially foreigners who now have to be allowed into your system to take a look and make sure, and almost basically babysitting you to make sure you're doing the right things. Digital investigation and forensic services are very expensive. To start bringing in people who have to start, and when you bring in your own people, to start looking around and to make sure that you are in fact complying and doing everything, that you have to do. Implementing new enhanced identity theft protection services. Again, all of this very expensive. Identity, and the impact to your insurance. I'm sure everyone here has insurance policies and knows insurance is great right up until you have a claim. As soon as you have a claim, your premium is going to go up. So there can be significant costs in insurance, cyber insurance, because a claim has happened for whatever reason. Then there's also, some of the collateral damage, and a lot of this will go to whether or not the company can recover damage to reputation. The reality is, as a very basic premise, given the choice of dealing with a company that has been breached and one that has not, you're probably going to go with the company that has not been breached, and that they are, better prepared. So reputation, can be incredibly costly for the company's longevity. So the legal issues you want to avoid are the three areas where you run into problems. First of all, a breach of contract lawsuit. You have a contract with your customers. In that contract somewhere, you agree or you promise to protect their information, or you promise to do what they're paying you to do. When you don't engage in proper conduct, reasonable conduct to avoid their data from being breached, this is you get the breach of contract lawsuit. And it does two things. As soon as the lawsuit is filed, you're already incurring legal costs. And a breach of contract lawsuit many times is not actually covered by your insurance. So these are going to be out-of-pocket costs. So you have legal costs, entity costs, reputation, loss of business. Loss of business, that at least that one person who you breached the contract with, that client is gone. So you're not going to be getting any more revenue from there. And of course, in a place like Rhode Island, if you do a great job, they might tell a few people. You do a bad job, they're going to run out and tell 100 people. So that's where we see those problems. Negligence would be the second area. This is based on the tort system as opposed to contract. And this is where you fail to engage in reasonable conduct and diligence. Now, reasonable is a standard that is always applied in any tort case, in a tort being a civil wrong. So motor vehicle accident, medical malpractice, it all is based on negligence, and it all has to do with the reasonableness of the conduct. What did you do to try to prevent the cyber incursion? What did you do to prepare for the cyber incursion? What did you do to protect your client's data? And essentially what it comes down to, reasonable conduct would mean that for your industry, you are engaging in at least minimum best practices or industry standard protection. You can't just sit there and let yourself, let your server or your system be breached and do nothing. You can't sit there and hope that it's not going to happen to you. As I already said, it's going to happen, but you've got to do something to prepare for it. Just can't sit back letting it happen. Similar to, you wouldn't just leave the front door of your office or your house open. You wouldn't leave your car running with the keys in the ignition. You have to do something to try to avoid the potential liability of what's going to happen if you don't. Regulatory enforcement, we see this in a number of different areas. So Office of Civil Rights, HIPAA, the payment card industry. Each one has their own set of regulatory rules. And if you are part of that system, you have got to comply with those rules. And as I said before, all 50 states have some type of data privacy laws that apply to you and may subject you to state regulatory claims. But rest assured, if you violate any of the regulatory rules, that is going to become the basis for a negligence lawsuit or a breach of contract lawsuit. So number 3 is extremely important, because any failure there guaranteed to touch off number 2, negligence or a breach of contract lawsuit. I chose to to post this particular case, the state of New York versus Dunkin' Brands. We all know who Dunkin' Brands are. Many of us get our Dunkin' Donuts coffee on a daily basis and may use the app that they have. The app that they have, essentially, you basically give them some money, they hold on to it, and so when you go there, you get to use your app or your card, and that's how you pay for your coffee or your donuts. So Dunkin', of course, if you look at the communication you get, the privacy policy and all the policies they promise that your information will not be compromised and it's going to be safe. In essence, you have a credit card on file with them, or you have multiple credit cards on file with them. So that is the information that Dunkin' Brands has when you choose to be part of this system. They were the subject of a rather small breach. It was 18,000 customer accounts had been wrongfully accessed, and they believed that they had taken care of, well, first of all, Dunkin' believed that they had done everything they could to avoid it, which clearly was not true. And thereafter, they thought, well, we've done everything we can to rectify the problem, and they did not do anything further. By 2018, the same group that had attacked them came back, and now they accessed 300,000 customer accounts. So Dunkin' now, and this case is still pending, Dunkin' now has gotten themselves in trouble with the state of New York because they failed to do what they were supposed to do, to notify customers and to then employ much more robust protection. And as a result, again, same group came in and attacked them again. We're able to get right back in there. And this kind of conduct, when it's happened once and you don't do enough to protect it and it happens again, this is almost always guaranteed to bring about regulatory enforcement and problems. And again, from here, at some point, we will see a class action lawsuit against Dunkin' Brands on behalf of the 300,000 customers who were wrongfully accessed. Cyber insurance claim denials is also becoming a popular and unfortunate byproduct of what's going on in the world of cybersecurity. Most companies will either have an attachment, a rider to their liability policy, or that specifically covers cyber insurance. We, of course, are recommending that everybody has standalone policies, and you really have, and the limits that you need really have to be based on the type of exposure you have. But in case you don't know, insurance companies are not in the business of paying claims. That's not what they do. That's not what they want to do. They always want to get out of paying claims. The concept of insurance is you pay us, we don't pay you. So when it comes to the cyber breach and the cyber insurance claims, they are getting savvy. They're getting smarter about how they're going to go about denying these claims. And the way that the denial works is they are going to issue a reservation of rights where they'll begin to investigate the case, and then they will reserve their rights to deny the claim at some other time. And so these are some of the big areas that we have seen already where insurance companies, they may not be successful, but they are clearly trying to make sure that they get out of paying these claims. Because again, the claims, many times the claims are huge. They go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There have been many, for the more notorious ones that you've heard about, into the millions of dollars of a cost associated with these breaches. So, so failure to maintain just means, again, you haven't followed industry standards. You have not done anything in order to protect yourself and your client's data. The PCI fines, again, this is the payment card industry. They will fine and they will pull money back if you don't follow, their regulations. Cyber extortion or ransomware, a lot of the policies are being written to specifically exclude, as in we're not going to pay the ransom. So if you need to pay a ransom, that's not going to be a covered expense under your insurance. And again, ransomware is getting to be, it's a huge problem. It's literally a multi-billion-dollar problem. And sometimes people find themselves in the situation where they have no choice but to pay the ransom. And that's not going to be something that is covered. Social engineering schemes are, instead of coming in through the computer, they basically come in through the front door. They put on a hat that you believe is your IT company, or a UPS, or some other company that you think is allowed access. They come in and they do something. There's a number of ways that they can infiltrate your system through social engineering schemes. And this is similar to what I said earlier. If you leave the keys in the car and the car is running, you will see that your auto policy, your auto insurance company is going to deny that claim. Similar, depending on what you did or what you failed to do to secure the physical location of your data, may result in a denial of claim, a denial of the claim. Go ahead, Carl, next one.
So Jules,
yep.
Go ahead. Some components of or best practices of a cybersecurity program. It's important, as Jules mentioned before, to have your defenses up, right? Look to align yourself with some sort of cybersecurity program. If you're regulated, as Jules mentioned, you're going to follow HIPAA guidelines. You're going to follow PCI guidelines if you're in retail. But even if you're not a regulated industry, you could follow, let's say, the NIST cybersecurity framework. So regardless of any of the frameworks that you may use, you want to have an upfront gap analysis, right? You want to see how your environment stacks up against that particular framework. You want to have written security policies in place. It's very, very important because it's going to dictate the conduct of your employees within the organization. And as Jules know with this third one, you want to have a security awareness program. Your employees are the first line of defense in any organization. And if you've been on any of the webinars that we've done here at the Tech Collective so far, we talk about this extensively. Train your employees. Have those technical controls in place, right? They're there to ensure what we call the CIA, or the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data, your client's data, your employees' data, right? And penetration testing, test those controls on a regular basis. Make sure that they're doing what they need to do.
I'm going to just jump in here really quick, Carl. So if I am your attorney and there's been a data breach, these 5 items are exactly what I'm going to want to have in my arsenal to defend you, to be able to point out from a regulatory perspective, a breach of contract, or a negligence suit. I want to have these 5 in my back pocket to say, look, we did everything we can. We did everything that was within the standard of care and the reasonable conduct that we needed to engage in order to protect the data.
So let's talk about real quick different types of cyber attacks that are out there. All right. As Jules mentioned before, there's malware. This is malicious software such as ransomware designed to damage or control a computer system. Usually comes in through what we call a weaponized document, through phishing, right? You receive that email with this document, you open it up, and now all heck is breaking loose out on the network because malicious programs are in place and doing things to take control of your system and your network. This also could be done through a fake website, and we saw a lot of this with COVID-19. There's still a bunch of it going on, and we'll be talking about that shortly. Some other ones that you might not have heard of: man-in-the-middle attacks. All right, this is when the attackers secretly relay and alter the communication between two parties who believe they are in direct communication with each other. So what happens? What's the outcome of that? Siphoning of information. We see money transfers or money wiring during man-in-the-middle attacks. VPNs, virtual private networks, they help prevent these MTMs by encrypting the traffic. And that's really important now as I talk to you from my home office in this age of teleworking that this COVID-19 pandemic has brought to us. Denial of service attacks, we see them. The last one that was notable that I read about is when we had our last military incursion with Iran. The day after that happened, financial institutions on the West Coast of the United States, Bank of America, major denial of service attacks on their networks. Cross-site scripting and SQL injection attacks, these are web application attacks. And the difference between these two is between SQL injection and cross-site scripting is that SQL injection attacks are used to steal information from databases, whereas the cross-site scripting attacks are used to redirect users, you're on a website, to a website where attackers can steal data from them. SQL injection is database focused, whereas the cross-site scripting is more towards attacking end users.
Hey, Carl, can I add to that before you move on?
Sure.
So on that, on this slide here, of the 6 different types of attacks that we see in the mid-market and the SMB are really the first 3: malware, phishing, and man-in-the-middle attacks. Man-in-the-middle is probably the least prevalent of them because you'd have to have someone that just doesn't recognize the fact that the email address is wrong. Like the name could be right, but sometimes the email address is wrong, and that's only happened a few times. But phishing and malware are definitely the most prevalent of all the attacks. And if you kind of go back to what Jules was saying about failure to maintain and social engineering, this is where these 2 things really come into play, is that phishing is something that can be really taken care of via education, which is the way that we most commonly solve that problem. Sophisticated attacks are even harder to solve because they socially engineer you, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then malware is really the one that gets the infrastructure locked up, where they explore or exploit encryption on servers and things of that nature. And that's where you have to have a plan of disaster and recovery in order to recover your data, or you're going to end up paying the ransom. And insurance companies have paid the ransom in the past, but to Jules's point, they're starting to write policies which start to exclude them from doing it, because what used to be a couple $1,000s has turned into hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, and it's getting expensive, and we don't know how legal it is to send money to the Ukraine. So, yeah, it's getting more sophisticated. So, thanks, Carl.
You got it. So some types of malware real quick. I mean, we're all familiar with some of these, right? Adware maliciously feeds you ads. I mean, it is a form of malware. Spyware, as Jules mentioned before, it can take control through either keyloggers or taking control of your camera on your computer. And then worms and Trojans. And these are the ones that we see quite a bit, right? A worm is a standalone malware computer program that replicates itself in order to spread to other computers, right? It'll use, so if you get a worm on your machine and it's connected to a network, it'll use a machine as that host and scan and infect other computer devices. Trojan, just like the old Greek mythology, disguised as legitimate software, all right? And it's employed by cyber thieves and hackers to gain access to user systems. Users are typically tricked by some form of social engineering into loading and executing Trojans on their system. So we still see quite a bit of this. And down below, you see that blended threat. The cyber thieves are always thinking, they're always on their game, they're nation state, they're large, they're backed. So they'll combine many forms of malware in an attack. So on the upper portion of the screen, here's our CTO or CIO with going through the cybersecurity budget. And boy, those Benjamins really roll after that cybersecurity budget after a breach. And it's so true. Average 12 days is the average number of days that a ransomware incident lasts. And as Jules mentioned before, things you have to think about: calling your lawyer, breach notification if it's something now that X amount, if you're a regulated industry, now you have to let the media know, right? You have to let your clients know. You have to clean up your network. You may have to go through a forensics examination. But during that time period when ransomware hits and your business is locked down, no money's coming in the door, no transactions are happening, and you're literally paying for employees to sit there. Rick, anything you want to add to that?
No, just that it's so true. It
Yep.
really is. You know, it's the 12.1 days. I mean, in the incidents that we've seen, it's been a lot less than that. There are also cases where, you know, I have seen incidents in the past where it's been hundreds of days, right? Where there's a system or a facility that, you know, was set to the side, like a legacy system that wasn't patched and maintained, you know, and it was breached and no one even knew about it for quite some time. But this goes back to, you know, maintain, right? You know, so making sure that your systems are patched and monitored and watched, and even if they are dev systems, which are probably the most neglected, or archive systems, which are the second most neglected. But yeah, it's a great meme. So,
If I can just add something here, and the fact that it was too expensive to prepare for the breach has never been and will never be an adequate defense. You depending on what you have at stake, what you're exposed to, you've got to budget and the money that you need to adequately prepare. Because I couldn't afford it, we'll never get you anywhere. And what Carl said about calling the lawyer, you should already know who your lawyer is going to be in one of these incidents. The lawyer, the person you're going to call, should be already identified in your cybersecurity plan. Should know, and so that if this happens or when it happens, you have everything already in place and you're not searching around, who am I going to call, what am I going to do? The plan should be there, should be in writing, and you should be able to be rolled out immediately.
Here's just a stat, just to I threw this up here. We do a lot of work with KnowBe4, both Cyberstone Security and Vertical 6. They're one of our go-to partners for that security awareness training. They're a very reputable company. They've been in business for quite a while now, and they are they are one of the leaders in security awareness training. So some of the statistics that they put out, 20, and the one that I wanted to get across here is the 20 billion is projected ransomware damage cost by 2021. And of course, with COVID-19 and the pandemic, that's just escalated it. And the ransomware, the versions that we're seeing now, it's not only is it getting in and encrypting your system, but we're looking at destroyed backups, credentials that are stolen, even if you've paid ransom, and now employees, they're publicly exposing the victims, and they're leaking stolen data. It's really gotten to the point now where it's you have to have your defenses in place, and you have to think about this, and this has to be, cybersecurity has to be a decent part of the budget discussion every year. And what also struck me too from this latest statistics, ransomware attacks a company every 14 seconds.
And just to add to this, Carl, as far as what KnowBe4 does, in case there's some of you that don't know exactly what this means, end user awareness training, like there's never a situation where I want you, if you work for Vertical 6, to go buy $3,000 worth of Walmart gift cards, or to just simply use your credit card for Amazon Prime and just buy whatever you want, or for you to wire 40 grand to China to buy PCs to keep an inventory for Vertical 6. So these are the common phishing emails that come through our organization. I'm sure if you apply that to your company, it's probably those same things. People are trying to find out what you do for a business and then target finance, logistics, operations people to try to get that information or to get money and extract it from the company. So what KnowBe4 does is it tests you to make sure that if the link looks weird or the contextual part of it's wrong, and they're getting much, much better with this. So it's super important that if you don't have a cyber awareness or training program today, that you put one together, just so that you can protect yourself from these sort of things.
Thank you, Rick.
And if I can add to that, of course, that is part of the reasonable conduct. Whereas before, it was something that you might do if you have a significant number of users who are getting emails in, you have to do it. It becomes part of the reasonable conduct. And if you have a lot of employees who are opening up malicious emails and it keeps happening, your conduct in failing to institute this program, that becomes unreasonable, and that becomes the basis, of a suit. I mean, I can tell you, even lawyers, we're not immune from people trying. I have to constantly tell my own staff that I'm not so popular that a Chinese businessman wants to hire me, and I'm relatively confident that it's a malicious email. Don't open it. We always tell our employees, if it's really, really important, delete it. They'll come back. If they really need us, they will.
Yep. An important point too, Jules, is where you're seeing these type of, I'll call them type of phishing attacks now too. You're starting to even see it in social media and LinkedIn too. If you get requests that just ignore them, you don't necessarily need to start having a relationship. If you feel that you're getting hit from a LinkedIn request and the relationship doesn't feel right, ignore it. Don't go through with it. So some victims. This slide of 2019 victims, it still rings true to 2020. I'll go through this very quickly. Public sector, municipalities, because I've got a next chart that really breaks it down a little bit better than this for Q1 2020. Healthcare, financial sector, and once again here in 2020, healthcare has beat out the financial sector, and I think again strongly because of the latest pandemic. Retail and wholesale, professional. Jules, such as your occupation, manufacturing, IT sector, as Rick knows too, NIST has put out papers and publications on how MSPs and VARs now should align their cybersecurity frameworks. Education market, and I found something interesting out that I'm going to talk about that in a second on the next slide. Accommodation space, also they were the primary victims for breaches in 2019.
So because of COVID-19, we have seen a massive increase in attacks. Essentially, and many of these attacks, most of them, are supported by nation states, because we've got a lot of countries out there who have a tremendous interest in figuring out who's doing research on the vaccine and how can we get it. And it should not come as a shock to you. Governments employ hackers. Some governments have tens of thousands of them, and they work all day long trying to get the information. And of course, the United States is a tremendous target. But right now, anybody who is in the healthcare industry, having to do with research, they are being attacked constantly and have really raised significantly, their defenses, and the money that should be going into research is actually having to go into protection because of the amount of attacks that we're seeing.
One second, please.
So what we're seeing, at the beginning of 2020, researchers have found out that they've detected a malware attack, and pandemic-related attacks increased by 30,000%, and that is not a misprint. It's 30,000%. That is the increase in action we've seen of different areas being attacked. The security researchers have found that there have been more than 130,000 irregular, newly registered domains. And this kind of goes back to what we talk about, the employee education. You have to look at that domain. Just because it looks sort of like what it's supposed to, doesn't mean it is. You have to constantly be looking at, where is that email coming from? What is that domain? What is the full line of it? Because again, we see that these COVID-related domains, again, 130,000. So that's essentially 130,000, new areas of people to start hacking and trying to get at their information.
Yep. For wanting money for research illegitimately, PPE cures. The WHO also instituted, they had to put out a couple of press releases because immediately hackers started to spoof on the WHO website and started sending out emails, and they were completely, illegitimate. So very good point here, Jules. So, boom. So what can we do to get some relief? Employee awareness, as we mentioned before. Employee awareness, as Jules mentioned, very, very, very important. And we'll jump into these shortly. Keeping your systems current, very, very important. Backups, oh, you need backups, and there's some rules around them. Password policies, very, very important. Administrator accounts, security controls, and an incident response plan, as mentioned before. So tell me again, how if I click there, I'll win an iPad? No, not the case, not the case. Employee awareness. You need to make sure that the organization has a formal security awareness training program, right? It has to be mandatory for employees to complete, and the organization needs to maintain documented proof that the training was completed, right? And also when you put this program in place, you are doing controlled phishing tests against your employees, right? Those that do not pass the tests are push training. And it's very, very important, and make sure that the training content is regularly updated with current information.
If I can jump in here.
Yep,
so
please.
It has to become second nature. Okay, your employees have to get to the point where they're not even thinking about whether it is that it isn't. They're going defaulting automatically to no, it's a problem. It looks strange. It looks wrong. Immediately delete. Has to be second nature. Has to really be driven home. Has to constantly be, in training. And of course, the updating the current information. The training has to change because these hacks are changing. The people who are hacking are changing. The type of attacks are constantly changing. So you have to, similar to how you have to update your virus software, you got to update this testing because it's always different, and employees constantly need to be trained to how to avoid these problems.
Yeah, and to add to that, Jules, so when it comes to employee awareness training from the phishing tests like KnowBe4, it's a great tool. It tries to get you to take the clickbait, and if you get taken, it informs you and lets you know that that's what you did wrong and this is what you should do. The other piece of this is just employee training. Like we have a tool called Ninjio, which we roll out to some of our customers, which does an anime thing of, what to do if, you believe your camera was on and someone stole your identity, or those sort of things, because it's not just about corporate email at this point. It's about, we live in a world where IT is just part of what we do. And there's, it's not only your particular emails for work, but it's your Facebook identity, it's your LinkedIn profile, it's a number of different aspects of your digital life, including your credit, which must be maintained. So, strong passwords, that sort of stuff is all part of this employee awareness component.
Okay. Systems are kept current. Operating systems are current. They're supported by the vendor. You need to do monthly patching, right? Applications need to be current, supported by the vendor. Have a formal hardware, firmware management program in place. So all this stuff, Rick, is moving to the cloud, but still within the office environment. Things need to be updated and maintained. As you know, what is it, 2 Wednesdays ago, was it, Rick, where Microsoft put out the largest patch Tuesday ever? I think it was 129 fixes just in that one patch Tuesday release. And also, too, even if you are starting to move stuff to the cloud and you have applications out there, we can still provide vulnerability scanning to conduct and find any known vulnerabilities so that you can fix them, right?
Yeah, super critical just to keep everything just maintained and patched. I mean, it's kind of the bar at this point. We call them run tasks, but it's one of those things that has to be a process. It has to be a system that everything is patched as soon as it's necessary to be patched. Like the patches are evaluated, and then on a nightly or weekly basis, you're patching your systems.
Right. And backups, all critical data systems configuration files are in scope of a backup strategy, right? Do a formal business impact analysis. Your backup strategy leverages the 3-2-1 rule, right? So you're going to want 3 copies of a backup, 2 different media. Make sure one of those are off-site. The backups are secure, not constantly connected to the production network, right? Make sure that your backup media has sufficient capacity for routine backup jobs, and make sure that they are monitored, right? And alerts and notifications are sent to backup job fails to the appropriate personnel. I actually have a client. They're a trucking company here in upstate New York, and these guys they will run a section of their business once a quarter off their backups for testing purposes. Very, very important to do.
Yeah, to add to Carl's statement, all of these things are critically important. Don't keep it plugged into the server, and you have to have a continuity plan as well. So if you were to get hit by malware and it was to encrypt all of your servers, how would you continue operations? Like, would you have 3 servers would be enough out of the 12 that you actually own?
Right.
You know, would that be enough to get you through? Like, that's a very important discussion to have before it happens.
And again, that does play into the legal aspect of it. That is part of the reasonable conduct. And I can tell you, essentially, if I walk into a place where there's been a breach, I have Rick and Carl with me, and you say you don't have backups, we kind of look at each other. There's not really a lot we can do at that point, except maybe, and we're not supposed to say this, but at that point, we're thinking you might have to pay the ransom because there's not much we can do. And I mean, it's just so critically important to have the backup and to know that the integrity of it is there.
And just know that if you're developing malware or spyware or some malicious code to exploit someone's systems, the first thing they know you're going to do is recover that backup. So they do things to try to exploit that, right? So if it's a locally attached backup, they encrypt that too. You know, they're always trying to find a new way, and they're getting incredibly sophisticated on how to do this. So like that 3-2-1 rule couldn't be more true. You know, to have a copy off-site, a copy on-prem, use a different password for the backup service versus the admin account. All of those things. I mean, and nothing's perfect, but you just really want to try to do your best, to Jules's point, to make sure that you're following proper best practices.
Best practices. Folks, this is my last meme, but it leads into my next slide perfectly. I changed all my passwords to incorrect, so whenever I forget, it will tell me your password is incorrect. Love, Steve Carell. Passwords. Let's talk about this real quick. Make sure a formal password policy exists and has been read by all authorized users, right? Passwords must minimally be 8 to 14 characters in length. They should have some sort of complexity requirements, 1 uppercase, 1 number, 1 special character. Now, you know, we say passwords should be changed every 30 days. Have some sort of schedule where you're forcing your employees to change their passwords. And the previous 5 passwords cannot be reused, and accounts need to be locked after 3 failed login attempts. Because even when we do our penetration testing, we do dark web reconnaissance. If you happen to be a person that was involved in a large breach, as one that Jules mentioned before, we can find credentials on the dark web. And if you're using the same type of password scheme, guess what? If our ethical hackers can figure that out, you know the bad guys are figuring that stuff out. Administrator accounts. You know, the important one here, end users are not provide local or domain admin credentials. Domain admin accounts are restricted to those who need them. All right. And if anybody's going in and modifying any admin accounts, it needs to be monitored, and they need to have an inventory of those accounts. Security controls. I think we pretty much talked about this. You know, this is from our checklist. Antivirus, anti-malware is applicable on all assets, right? Email and web filtering technologies are installed. All right. They're regularly updated. You know, make sure that your network is properly segmented. Use of external media such as thumb drives, prohibited. Doesn't need to be used. And acceptable use policies in place and have been read by all authorized users. I think we got 3 minutes left here, and we'll finish up on this, the incident response plan. You know, make sure a formal incident response plan is documented and members of that incident response team are properly trained. As Jules mentioned before, make sure that the appropriate parties are listed in this plan so that if, let's say, the CEO, the CFO the CTO may not be in the organization, but there's other members of the team that are there, they can open up this plan, they know who to call, they know the steps that need to be followed. Jules, Rick, anything you want to add to that?
No, again, and I keep saying it over and over, but again, part of what would be considered reasonable conduct, it is getting to the point that if you do not have this incident response plan in writing and documented, and by the way, there are a lot of insurance companies now who are asking, specifically when you apply for the insurance, do you have a formal written incident response plan? And if you say yes and you don't, that becomes a basis for denying coverage, because in essence, you've lied to them. But it's incredibly important to make sure that everybody, you have your entire team, everybody knows who to call. Again, if your primary people are not there, secondary and tertiary people are trained and know exactly who to call and how to start dealing with things. Because from a legal perspective, how you deal with things immediately, goes a long way into the protection we can provide later on. We don't want people going out there. We don't need multiple people speaking. Generally, we have one person responding and nobody else. And nobody else is talking and nobody else is communicating, by email or on the internet in any way, shape, or form. We have to centralize the response and do it formally and accurately.
Great.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add, Carl, except thank you to you and Jules for really helping educate everyone on this. It's a serious topic. It really is, and I think it's really more about preparedness, getting your ducks in a row. And clearly, if anything you could do or need any help in any of these areas, we'd be happy to facilitate with Jules or Carl or personally, just to make sure that your organization is protected.
Yes.
So I have to say, my closing remark would be, knowing all this, how do I sleep at night? Vertical 6 and Cyberstone. I'm not just a proponent, I'm also a client. This is how I sleep at night because of these guys.
Thank you, Jules.
Thank you all so much. What a powerful presentation with a lot to think about. And Jules, to your point, I think there may be a few people who are maybe not going to sleep so soundly or are going to be thinking what can they do to make their businesses a little bit more secure. So thank you all for the presentation, for the time that you spent putting it in. To Creosa from the Tech Collective team who put this all together. She will have on the Tech Collective YouTube channel next week. This presentation will be broadcast. So certainly if there's information, the slides you want to look back on, that will be up early next week for all of you. And again, thank you to Jonna from Vertical 6 who organized this for us and got these incredible speakers to come and educate all of us today. So thank you all. There is a one question questionnaire in the chat. If you would please take a moment, just so we know, did we hit the mark? Was this what you were hoping to receive? Did our presenters really get you the information that you needed? We would very much appreciate your participation. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Take care. Be well. Thank you.
Bye.